You're born in Japan in the 1500s into a family that has spent generations doing the most sacred and most body-destroying work that exists in this country: forging katanas. Everyone thinks that sounds magnificent. Art in metal, spirituality made steel, the craft of the gods. And technically, you'd be right to think so. The Japanese of your era believe the katana has its own soul, that the swordsmith is almost a priest, that the forge is a temple. You'll hear this over and over throughout your life. What nobody mentions in those pretty speeches is that your body is going to age twice as fast as any other man of your time, that your lungs are going to absorb toxic smoke for 4 decades, that your hands are going to be unrecognizable by 30, and that you'll spend entire stretches of time unable to so much as touch your own wife because the ritual purification laws explicitly forbid it. Welcome to your life. Hope you like fire. In feudal Japan, there is no choosing a profession when you're born into this. This isn't a calling. It's a biological inheritance as inevitable as the color of your eyes. Your father does it. Your grandfather did it. Your great-grandfather died with his hands covered in burns and his lungs black with soot. And nobody considered that a tragedy, because that's how everyone in your family ended up. The katana carried by the most powerful samurai in the province bears your family's mark. And that supposedly should make you feel proud. The first thing you see when you open your eyes in this world is not your mother's face. It's the smoke-blackened ceiling of the family forge. You live on top of the work. That smell of charcoal, hot metal, and burning steel is going to be the smell of your entire life. By age 5, you no longer notice it. And that, strangely enough, is the sign that something irreversible has already started happening to your lungs. Your training begins when you're physically capable of pushing the bellows without falling backward, somewhere around 6 or 7 years old. The fuigo is essentially the artificial lung of the forge. 2 wooden chambers that pump air to keep the charcoal at the exact right temperature. That's your job at first, pumping, for hours, while your father works the metal and you sweat like you're inside an oven, which is basically exactly where you are. The temperature at the core of the forge exceeds 2200 degrees Fahrenheit. You are less than 3 feet from that core. You'll learn very quickly to read the color of glowing metal. Bright yellow with near white flashes means it's too hot. Deep cherry red is the sweet spot for hammering. The dark red edging toward black means the metal is losing temperature. One mistake can cause the metal to crack from the inside without you seeing it, producing a sword that's beautiful on the outside and structurally compromised on the inside. The samurai who buys it won't find out until he actually needs it. Around age 10, you start using the hammer. Not to strike the blade yet. You start hitting practice iron while your arms learn the rhythm and your wrist learns to direct the impact. The hammer weighs between 4 and 9 pounds. Striking metal for 8 hours with that weight makes your arms go numb somewhere after midday. Your body will adapt. Within 3 years, your shoulders and forearms will have the muscle mass of someone twice your age. The problem is that tendons and joints don't adapt as well as muscle, and they accumulate damage bit by bit without announcing it. You'll discover that later, when chronic pain is already such a normal part of your existence that you can't imagine what it felt like not to have it. The material you work with is called tamahagane, steel of the jewels. It's the result of a process called tatara that lasts exactly 72 hours straight, 3 days and 3 nights without interruption, in a clay furnace built specifically for the occasion and destroyed when it's done, because tradition dictates the furnace is single use. You, your father, and the apprentices rotate in shifts to pump the bellows without the airflow breaking for even a moment. 3 days sleeping, no more than 2 or 3 hours at a stretch, in constant heat, with the sound of charcoal breathing around you. What remains is a block of steel that can weigh between 2,000 and 4,000 pounds, with zones of different carbon concentration that are impossible to predict exactly. Your job, the one that will take decades to master, is to separate and classify those fragments by eye and by hammer strike and combine them in exactly the right way. Hard where it needs to cut. Flexible where it needs to absorb impact without snapping. The most famous katana in the world is not a bar of steel. It's an architecture of different materials, assembled with a precision that 21st century metallurgists still study with genuine amazement. And you build it without microscopes, without thermometers, without written formulas. Only with what your eyes see and what your hands know. The process of folding the steel is called tenren, and your culture has elevated it almost to the level of a religious act. You heat the block to exactly the right cherry red, flatten it with the hammer, fold it over itself while it's hot, weld it back together by hammering again, and repeat. Every time you fold the steel, you double the number of internal layers. 15 folds produce more than 32,000. The standard process involves between 10 and 16 folds, resulting in a steel whose visual pattern, the jagain, the grain of the metal, is, when polished, one of the most beautiful objects the human hand has ever produced. While you're creating it, it's an endless sequence of heat, hammer strikes, and millimeter-level decisions that allow for zero distraction. Every time the metal comes out of the fire, you have less than a minute to work it. The strikes are automatic, coordinated between the master holding the metal and the apprentices hammering in a percussive pattern that looks more like synchronized music than manual labor. One mistake in the rhythm, one misplaced strike, can create an internal irregularity that won't show up until the blade is nearly finished, and it's already too late to fix it without starting over. The most dramatic moment of your professional life, the one that will make your heart race every single time you reach it, no matter how many times you've done it, is the yaki aira, the differential hardening. The instant where months of work ride on 10 seconds. You coat the blade with a paste of clay, powdered charcoal, and iron oxide in layers of calculated thickness. Very thin over the edge, where you want extreme hardness. Thick over the spine, where you need flexibility. When the clay dries, there's a silence in the workshop that doesn't resemble the silence of any other moment. Everyone has seen a blade shatter in the water at least once. You heat the coated blade to the exact right temperature, which is not a number on any instrument, because in your era, no measuring instruments exist. It's the color of the flame reflected in the metal. A specific shade of bright orange with a slight reddish tint that you can only see correctly when the outside light is minimal. That's why the yaki ear is done at night. You plunge the blade into water. The steel cools in an instant. The edge, with its thinner layer of clay, undergoes the most abrupt change and becomes the hardest part of the weapon. In the transition zone, between the hard edge and the flexible spine, something forms that has no equivalent in any other metalworking tradition: the hamon. A sinuous line that collectors in the centuries to come will study through magnifying glasses and describe with the vocabulary of poets. And it forms in those 10 seconds that you cannot control once they've begun. If the temperature was too high, the blade fractures in the water with a sharp crack. If the yaki ire goes wrong, months of work go back into the fire as if they never existed. The first time you do it alone and it works, your heart takes a full day to return to its normal rhythm. By 30, you are a competent swordsmith. By 40, if you've had real talent and haven't destroyed your reputation, you can hope to be considered a master. The client is the samurai, or the feudal lord, or the intermediary who arrives with technical specifications and an attitude that makes it clear that if the result isn't exactly what was requested, there will be consequences. The relationship is formally one of mutual respect. In practice, the man who holds the power of life and death over thousands of people sets the terms, and you execute without negotiating. One refusal can destroy a reputation that took 20 years to build. Your personal life is complicated in a way that no man from any other trade can understand. During periods of sacred work, you must remain in a state of ritual purity. That means weeks of celibacy and isolation that in practice turn you into someone who disappears from his own family during the moments of highest intensity. Your wife accepts it as an unavoidable part of the deal. But knowing something in theory and living it in practice for decades creates a distance that no speech about the honor of the craft can make up for. Your children grow up with a father who is sometimes physically present, but mentally somewhere else entirely. The greatest achievement of your life comes around age 45. A blade that takes you 7 months, that you redo twice because the internal pattern doesn't have the distribution you're looking for, and that in the yaki ear produces a Haman of a complexity and coherence you've never achieved before. The samurai draws it slowly, holds it up to the light, examines it for a stretch of time that feels endless, and nods. Just that, a brief nod. And that is all that those who do this work well ever receive. It will be one of the few times in your life that someone communicates to you that clearly that what you do truly matters. By 50, your hands have more scar tissue than unmarked skin. There's a spot on the back of your right hand where the feeling never fully came back after a metal fragment went in too fast at age 32. Your knees make a dry sound when you bend them. Your back has a curvature that basically means you spent too many years hunched over the anvil in positions the human skeleton was not designed to hold for 4 decades. And the most silent thing of all, the lungs. The damage from inhaling smoke and metal particles doesn't announce itself with sharp pain, but with reduced capacity that decreases so gradually that you adjust to the new limit before you've even noticed it. Every year you can walk a little less before stopping to catch your breath. You don't connect this to the work because in your era, the concept of occupational disease doesn't exist. You just feel like you get tired more easily. That certain mornings, getting up requires an effort you never used to recognize as effort. And then something happens that no ancestor could have prepared you to face. Peace arrives. The Tokugawa shogunate consolidates the Edo period. Peace, which sounds wonderful in every temple poem, has one very specific consequence for your trade. Samurai need fewer swords. Orders decline. Clients negotiate price because now they have time to compare. The time it takes you to make a sword is exactly the same as it's always been because the physics of metal don't change with politics, but the money you receive starts to erode. The most brutal irony: you are more skilled than you have ever been in your life, and the market for that skill is shrinking. Your sons grew up in the forge exactly the way you did. The oldest has real ability that already surpasses yours in certain areas. The youngest would rather do just about anything else, and there are nights when you catch him staring out toward the outside world with an expression you recognize because you had it yourself at his age. And that goes away the moment you accept that the choice isn't available to either of you. There's a moment when your oldest son watches you work with the critical attention of someone who already understands enough to judge what he sees, and you realize the cycle is going to repeat itself exactly. His hands are going to end up like yours. His lungs are going to end up like yours. And the katana he forges at 40 with all that hard-earned mastery is probably going to be more perfect than anything you've ever produced. That gives you simultaneously the most genuine pride you've ever felt, and a sadness that has no name in any language you know. The last years you spend in the workshop, more as a supervisor than as an active swordsmith. Your hands still know exactly what to do. The problem is that they can't always execute it anymore. You take on the most invisible role of all. The one who no longer does the main work, but whose presence determines why the others can do it well. You die in the forge. Not dramatically. One day, your heart decides it's done enough work and stops. You're in your mid to late 60s. Which for someone who spent 4 decades breathing charcoal smoke is quite a bit more than the statistics would have suggested. The blade you were supervising that day has a half-formed edge, no definitive shape yet. Your son will finish it. It will carry his swordsmith's mark, not yours. But the hammer on that blade, when it's complete and polished, that sinuous, perfect line between what is hard and what is flexible has a pattern that any master will recognize as belonging to your lineage without needing to see any signature. The steel remembers who taught it to be what it is. It doesn't need to be told. That's all that remains of you. And it turns out that, in this trade, that's enough. That was what it meant to be a Katana Swordsmith in Feudal Japan. Not the sacred artist from the movies. Not the serene, enlightened master, quietly contemplating his masterpiece. The man who sacrificed his body, his lungs, and 40 years of his life so that others could have the most perfect weapon that steel and human hands were ever capable of producing in the entire history of metallurgy. If this video made you feel, for even a moment, that your current job could be worse than it is, that was exactly the point. Subscribe. Every week we live a life you wouldn't wish on your worst enemy. And the next one is even harder than this.